All right. So, all right. So, I need your attention up here. So, we went over procedures in the classroom, we went over warm-ups and all that stuff. Hey guys, I need your eyes up here. I'm gonna have to shuffle your seats around and make you uncomfortable. Hey, if you're joining us on the live stream, if you have a question, please go ahead and type it in the comments. What we're gonna go over now is we're gonna start discussing some of the things that have to do with ancient Greece. Since the first portion of our classroom actually has to do with the Greek people, especially the ones that left writing behind, because that's essentially what history is. History isn't necessarily the story of people, it's the story of people that we know. And it's the story of people that we know through the written word. Because if you learn about people and it's not from writing, it's usually from something we call anthropology or archaeology, right? And we can learn a lot from those things, but usually it has to do with, like anthropology has to do with the scientific study of how people act together. And so we kind of use what we learn from other groups of people to guess about people we never met. In archaeology, we tend to use things left behind by people, including their bones, and figure out how they lived, right? And figure out their diet, how they use tools and things like that. So let's go ahead and put some terms up here on the board that we are going to need to know in order to travel through an historical class. So the first one, there's things that you use whenever you talk about history, one of which has to do with time. And so whenever we talk about history, we have two different ways we can go about it. You can either go chronological with time, or you can go like chronological or topical, which has to do with the topic. So, chronological. If I misspell something, just forgive me. So, hey, if you're streaming with us, I can take a picture of this and I can upload it onto the Google Classroom. So you have that. We are going to have more assignments for you in the future. So like my other students here, they had an introductory assignment. So I'm going to get an introductory assignment for you too. And it's just going to be a little bit about yourself and maybe any questions you have for me. And then more's to come later. So chronological. So this has to do with the study of history. Chronologically. But you know, you can't have the meaning of the word in the like you can't use the word you're defining in the definition or it doesn't make any sense. That's like saying, what is red? Red is the color red. I didn't tell you anything. All right, so study of history.
Stellar is stellar. That's a public name.
Color?
Using
A color in which
time and order. So we're going to talk about the things we talk about are generally going to be in a chronological order, but we're going to find that sometimes we're going to shift out of that chronology and more into topics. They said none of them want to eat.
You got lunch?
Everybody has lunch?
I brought more chicken.
No. I was just wondering.
You just wait.
I brought some, what's it called? Peel tree meat.
Bro, is that a white or a tea?
Have you ever had pickled?
I don't have lunch with them, but I will with them.
They're so good. They taste like pickles. Yeah. They have the
Why
garlic
are these
lunch.
other white?
You want fish nuggets?
Duty,
I don't know. I don't know. I'm so confused.
All right, you have questions, sir?
No.
Say what?
I dropped the paper on the
Of
floor.
milk?
I thought it was gonna go.
No, I think you had that. I'm not sure. Let's see.
I thought this was just gonna go.
Is it?
No, it's so-
No.
Oh, wait. Yeah.
Whole milk, okay.
Oh.
You gotta have the whole meal,
Okay.
but
That was not smart.
All right, folks, so let's get back to it. So chronological. Question.
Is that an E or a Y?
The why.
That's a Y. Why? Because it's a Y. All right, so
Why is why?
we study it going through time. Second question.
Okay, look, how was our alphabet made? Like, who thought of it?
Our alphabet's based on
Roll.
Look.
What's it called?
just real quick. It's based, yeah, it is. It's based on the Roman alphabet.
Whoa.
That was actually based on, I think it was based on the Assyrian alphabet before that. Which,
I know there's a name.
How, I don't know.
but hey, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. All right, second one.
You should have used your question during like the meat thing.
ABX.
Top,
Yeah.
hey, folks. Now remember, when I'm talking to the class, you have absolutely no permission to talk, okay? But I will give you discussion time. But that's gonna be tomorrow, right? All right, so topographic. So like you might have a topographic map, right? So topography can have to do with type. So when we're on a topic in history, it could be like a subject, right? So the study of history based on a feature. And a feature can be, it could be like wars. It could have to do with rights. It could have to do with the advancement of an economy. It could have to do with like women's history, or it could have to do with, heck, there's even environmental history. There's history of how nations are founded. So there's a lot of different ways you can take this. Often when you're going, whenever you're, the thing is, they're not exclusive. When you're going down a timeline, different sub-features and subjects come up, right? If you're doing this, though, you're doing topographical, you're still like, if you're like a, I don't
Still
know,
going in time order in the topic.
you should, because if you don't, it's going to get confusing. It's going to get really confusing really quickly, and then you're going to lose your audience. All right. So we have that. Now, I heard you say that with Mr. Martinez, that y'all talked about references, right? And references come from sources. A source is something you use to learn about something. So we have two kinds of sources. We have primary and secondary sources. So, primary source. Air. I'm not talking about elements or something like that. All right. Yeah. So a primary source, it's the primary. It's like saying it's the first one. So a primary source could be like a first-hand account. Usually, you want a primary source to be somebody who was there when something happened, and then they wrote about it. It's kind of hard when you're talking about really ancient people, because not a lot of people could write back then. And the ones who did write, their stuff didn't always make it through time. A lot of it was lost. Like a lot of the primary sources on Alexander the Great, they're all gone. The only one that's left is actually a guy who wasn't there but heard from people who were there. And his name was Aaron. So yeah, a lot of the others, like written by his general Ptolemy, who would later become a pharaoh of Egypt, that was lost. Others were lost as well. So it's one of those things we have to piece together later in time because people will reference them. So primary source, made by someone who.
Is that a Y or an E on primary? Because I know that's probably it's spelled with a Y, but it kind
It's
of
a
looks,
Y.
it looks like a primary.
Let's see, like imagine a line here. Okay. All right, someone who was close to an event. So, like, modern primary sources could be like newspaper.
Maybe it's because your Y is curved backward.
Yeah, let's make it pretty. It's for your,
It looks like a G. Big.
it's for your enjoyment. But don't worry.
She goes the other way.
If you spend too much time criticizing my handwriting, you're gonna be here all day. All right, so back to this. So like a modern example of a primary source. So I said a newspaper. What's another one that could be a modern primary source?
Like a survivor of an incident.
Survivor's account. Yeah, like that's one thing modern historians do now is they take they do interviews, kind of like a news reporter, right? During the Great Depression, there were still people who survived from the old slave days before the Civil War. And so during the Great Depression, they had a lot of these people go out and interview these survivors before, they all passed away. And so that's why the National Archives are full of their accounts, and some of them are audio recordings that were obtained later on, stuff like that. Same with soldiers who fought the Civil War, North and South, So it's a big deal today, too. People are trying to get as many interviews as they can in some aspects, like people who were around World War II and the Holocaust. So those people are old. They're like in their 90s and stuff. They're not going to last that much longer. So people are trying to get as much information they can out of them through interviews. Because, when you're in your 90s, you're probably not writing a lot of books or anything
My
like that.
favorite is 91.
91. Yeah, my wife's great grandmother is 96. And she was here during World War II. She said almost her whole high school class of boys died in the war. It's like they were just all gone. It's like went off to the war and they were gone. So yeah, primary sources. So, it's sad. Wars stinks. It really does stink. There can be some noble things about it, but it's one of those things that you have to be very soberly minded about the consequences, right? All right. So the other source, secondary sources. So
That looks like a deal, yeah.
they're all going to look like that. Haven't you noticed it's a handwriting pattern? All right.
Why do you do
Wait,
that?
where are your E?
Secondary source.
Your
Secondary.
E and your Y look exactly the same.
Pretty much just a little
It
bit
looks
on
the
top.
same. Yes, it does.
It just looks like
That
the
looks
circle
like
size.
the-
It's a
It's a
cursive
piece
Y.
like this.
That looks like the start of a tree and just made its way on the side.
That's all right.
It looks like a cursive L.
I'm not writing in cursive.
No, it looks like you tried drawing an E.
All right. Okay.
We're just like
So-
critiquing your hand.
Secondary sources. So we said that a primary source was from somebody who was there at the thing. A secondary source would be from someone who was
Told or secondary, like account.
say again, please.
It's like the difference between autobiography and a biography.
You're right. In autobiography, the author is
Right.
the one. Yeah, the one who. Yeah.
The
So
auto means
The auto.
yeah, presidents do that all the time. Almost every president I can think of has an autobiography, right? They write their own book about their own life. And then you got a biography where somebody else writes it for you or about you. Usually when you're already, passing the world.
I'm a bike.
All right, so like I was saying, a primary source is someone who's at the event. A secondary source, hey guys, up here. Second time, 3 strikes, you're out. So a secondary source is from somebody who was not there, right? So made by someone who was not at an event or even around at that time. So like a secondary source could be somebody who wrote about a historic event kind of close time-wise, but wasn't even there. Or a secondary source could be somebody written now. Kind of like somebody who wrote a commentary on ancient Egyptians today, that is a secondary source. They might want to reference primary sources and even other secondary sources. Now, our textbook is a secondary source. But I'm going to give you primary sources, provide them online, and I can print them for y'all here that we're going to read. So I plan on, there's some speeches, that real famous speeches. We're going to read a few of those. There's a couple of short biographies, and by short, I mean, you know, like no more than 30 pages, that we're going to read as well. So these are 4 major terms for us. Now, I don't know if you can see it very well if you're streaming, but I pulled up a map of ancient Greece. So I'm going to discuss it a little bit. If you can't see it, feel free to use Google Images to pull up a map of ancient Greece and just get a general feel of the outlay of it. So, question? Not yet. You gotta wait a second. All right, so you're looking at Greece. Just kind of ignore all the words up there for the different areas and the different cities and islands. But I want you to think, raise your hand if there's something that really stands out in this map to you. Yeah.
Macedonia existed. It
Yeah.
still exists.
But think about something that has to do with like non-specific. What's a generality you can make about this map? Compare it to like the map of the United States. Yes, sir.
It's always around water.
Water, yeah, there is water everywhere. The Greeks were a seafaring people. They almost all had some connection to the sea or trade. Yeah. Didn't have it? No? Okay. Just relaxing. Hey, there's something else you can't see on this map, and I wish you could. These land masses, yes, there's a bunch of islands, and there's some larger peninsulas. You know, a peninsula is connected to the continent, but it's surrounded by water by three or most sides, you know, most of it. These are mountainous regions. These are almost entirely just mountain ranges all in the middle. And these aren't like easy mountains either. These are rocky mountains, very steep. So they kind of push the people to live on the edge of the water. They can't grow crops that well on it. They can't herd sheep or horses or cows. So they're living mostly along the coast. Where there's valleys, they go live there. But this defines how these people live. It's a pretty warm region. So the animals and the plants that are there naturally or for cultivating as farming have to do with a warm Mediterranean climate. So it's generally warm all year. It does get a little cool in the winter. The Mediterranean Ocean and the Aegean are pretty much very calm seas too, especially during ancient times. They didn't have like hurricanes and stuff like that. They didn't have really bad storms either. So it was a pretty calm place to sail. It was pretty safe. You could also, if you stuck around the coastlines, it was generally safe as well. And so the people are pushed out to the sea by the land. And they learned very early on how to sail quite well. They're very good sailors. Because they're out in the sea, they have contact with people in the east, like the people of Mesopotamia, like modern day Iraq, some of our most ancient societies. They have contact with ancient Egyptians. And they also have contact with Italians up in the west. They're going to absorb pieces of each one of these cultures, but they're also going to export some of their culture into these other people. So you can have an exchange of goods and ideas and things like that. But you're also going to have other exchanges as well. Like if and when you read the Iliad, you're going to find that the ancient Greeks were very warlike. They often did a lot of piracy and things like that. Some say that it was pirates from this region that may have ended the first Bronze Age. They were called the Sea People. They'll eventually start moving into other regions, and you'll have, say, like the Philistines. Those are people who are going to be in contact with the ancient Israelites, but they're going to come from Greece. So these are people who are going to go all around the area. we get a lot from them, we're going to find as well. A lot of habits in how people greet one another, how we educate one another, how our governments run, how we talk to one another. A lot of this is going to come from Greek ideas. Yes, sir. Is what? Roads? Let's see.
Are those little dotted lines where people travel?
It says regional boundaries and international boundaries.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't see it on the map. But then the places we are going to talk the most about is, of course, going to be, see the Peloponnese there? Right under that, there's Sparta. I'm going to talk about that. And the other here, if you look a little bit to the east, in Attica, you have Athens. Of course, we're going to talk about Corinth, Thebes, and places like that too. There's a couple of reasons why we talk so much about Athens and Sparta. And one of the reasons is because they have the most books that survive them. So when we talk about ancient Greece, we're mostly talking about Athenians and Spartans. You can see here, there's like 1 million cities up here. There's a whole bunch of islands. They all had a lot of similarities. They spoke the language that sounded about the same, ancient Greek. Later it's going to be called Koine, which is common Greek. That's what ancient scriptures were written in. Yes?
How do they come up with all the names of the islands?
I think it's one of those things that's kind of organic. Like some of these names have to do with like their mythology, right? With their gods and stories like that. Like Athens is named after their goddess Athena because they had a myth that she picked the place where the city would be built or something like that. I don't remember Sparta, but like a lot of them have to do with mythology, you know. You look at American cities. Most American cities are named after like a historical person, right? Like a historical American. Like Tyler's named after President John Tyler. Jacksonville's named after Andrew Jackson. Bullard, he's a guy who has to do something with Texas history.
Austin.
Yeah, Austin. Yes, even in Austin. So
Philadelphia is good for one of the features
for what?
for love.
For love? Yeah, like Philadelphia is here in America. It means the city of brotherly love, right? So yeah, and I think
Eros.
yeah, and eros is another kind of love, and you have agape. That's like what people usually think of as like Christian love, right? So you got like eros is more like kind of like love that's more has to do with kind of like hedonism and stuff like that. So like we're going to talk a bit about this as we move on through our stories. Now remember, before tomorrow, I want you to read chapter 1 out of your textbook. And we're going to go through this again. Make sure you have these down because whatever we put on the board is testable stuff for you.
Or we can be able to use our notes over.
You can use your notes to study, but now tests are closed note. You know, I mean, we have to have some kind of metric to show that you've learned something in the course, right?
Or that you've actually paid attention and wrote it down.
If you have that kind of memory, that's fine. But I don't trust my memory. I mean, like I have to study before class too sometimes. I really do. Like your readings here, I've read this book probably 5 times, but I read the chapter.
The whole book.
Yeah, it's not that big a book. But I mean, I make sure I look at I go over the chapter before we talk about it. Because if I'm going to make you do something, I'm going to do it too. It only seems fair, right?
This is light reading from this very, what's very light day.
Now that's your textbook. That's not the only thing you're going to get. Because like I said, I'm going to print some things out for you. I've asked for some classroom sets to certain things, but it doesn't sound like I'm going to get it.
We still have.
Yeah, we still have a bit of time. We still have a bit of time.
Bread would probably have to be some.
Huh?
Bread would probably have to
I can.
All right, folks. Tell you what, I'm going to give you the rest of the class time. If you would, you can go ahead and you can start on chapter 1 now. It's pretty short. And if you're streaming with the class, I send up a link on the Google Classroom for you to read the book. It's attached as a PDF, so you should be able to open it up read chapter 1, and we're going to discuss that and take notes on that. I'm going to go ahead right now and take a picture of what we did write on the board today for notes, and I'm going to post that for you as well. All right, y'all take care.